Okay, great. Am I all good to start? Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Sam. I am a fourth year student at the University of Virginia, and I'm studying environmental science and biology. I'm also the team leader for UVA's waste minimization team. And so when my team and I were looking at, what to evaluate, of course, we wanted to evaluate our university. We have a lot of background here and we know a lot about the sustainability. But we also felt that as a large university in a small city, UVA has the potential to serve as a model for, just about any institution looking to improve its sustainability. It houses thousands of students, provides office space, gyms, food, laboratory space, operates hundreds of buildings, and oversees nearly 2,000 acres of land. So I think that if we can figure out how to, make UVA more sustainable, those lessons I think can be attributed really anywhere. So I'd like to first start off with a few larger scale statistics and then dive into some ways I think that they could maybe be improved. In 2020, UVA established a 10-year sustainability plan based on benchmark data gathered in 2010. And the first of those data that I'd like to talk about is kind of the obvious one, and that's our carbon footprint. Um, so UVA has stated a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030 and fossil fuel free by 2050. And since 2010, UVA has reduced its emissions by 44%. And that's a great place to be at. Given that these efforts only really kicked up in 2020, we are on track to hit that reduction goal by 2030. I think there's the real question of if that goal is ambitious enough, but I will circle back to that in a moment. The next statistic I'd like to talk about is our waste data. So the waste goal for 2030 is to reduce waste by 70% or to 30% of 2010 levels. And if you look at the data published by the university every year, you would see that UVA has reduced its waste by around 50%. But I believe that this figure is quite misleading. Almost all of that waste reduction is due to a decrease in coal ash because phasing out coal has been a big part of the carbon neutrality goal. Now, of course, it's great to be phasing out coal, but I think it feels a little bit like double dipping to me. And I think that to the layperson looking at the data without having the ability to really dig in deep and speak to people working at UVA itself, it is not very clear that, in fact, our landfilled waste has actually increased. So I think that's a real case of, poor transparency on the part of the university. The last large statistic I'd like to talk about today is our sustainable food purchasing. The UVA set a goal to have 30% of our food be purchased sustainably as certified by a couple different boards um, by 2030. And this goal was actually achieved this past year in the 2023 sustainability report. And that's fantastic. It's great that that goal was achieved so quickly. But I do think there's something to be said that if a 10-year goal can be achieved in 4 years, perhaps that goal isn't ambitious enough in the first place. And I think that's a common theme you'll find in many of these sustainability goals. Going back to the carbon goal, carbon neutral and fossil fuel free by 2030 and 2050 may not be ambitious enough. Perhaps this timeline should be shifted towards fossil fuel free by 2030 and carbon neutral much sooner than that. Um, I think that the transparency of these goals and their ambition is going to be a real theme of how UVA can improve its sustainability moving forward. But I'd like to give credit where it's due and talk about a few projects that I think have the biggest potential to improve our environmental footprint as an institution. And the first of those on the left here is the Water Chiller Project. For the past several years, UVA has been working on a project to couple all water cooling and heating on our grounds. So what that means is that the heat generated as a byproduct of our water cooling will then be used to heat our hot water. And that, combined with a complete re-outfitting of the way we heat our buildings with water, requiring much cooler water to be able to heat our buildings, means that the university expects to save 15% of the 2010 emissions um, once this project is completed. And that is colossal for an individual project. So I think that this is a real demonstration of a place where the university is making good progress and using its engineering capacity along with local contractors, WO Grubb and LA Lacey, to, yeah, do some really good stuff. I also think that the nitrogen, which is on the right here, the nitrogen footprint of the university has been headed in a good direction, though by no means without flaw. As you can see, all of the non-food nitrogen produced by UVA, specifically the reactive nitrogen loss to the environment, has decreased dramatically since 2010. But the food nitrogen has not decreased by very much. It has decreased, but there's still a lot of progress to be made there. So there's real credit to be given to those who have been working on our energy nitrogen and our transportation nitrogen, but our food sources, I think, could use a lot of improvement. And so that's one of the big opportunities of improvement that I'll be talking about now. So animal-based food products at the university constitute 85% of the reactive nitrogen loss from our food system, despite the fact that they only make up 35% of our food by weight. Right now, UVA Dine, who is the big decision maker for all things food at our university, has implemented a program where once or twice a semester, one or two of the dining halls will have a plant-based day, which is great. It's a great way to encourage plant-based eating and exploration. But I believe that this sort of measure can be, kicked up to another level. Perhaps if one, two, or three of the dining halls are having plant-based meals 2 or 3 times a week rather than a semester, that's a huge improvement on our nitrogen footprint while still allowing behavior change to take place over time, something that we have to recognize as a reality. Another big change that I believe UVA Dine can and should make is with our third-party contractors. So right now, UVA leases out dining space to companies like Subway and Chick-fil-A, and they serve thousands of meals a day to our students and community members. But the sustainability goals that I talked about on the last slide, despite being written into the contracts for these institutions, are not measured and they are not enforced. And my team, actually, my waste minimization team and our many volunteers have for years been collecting data suggesting that the vast majority of landfilled food-related waste is coming from these third parties. And it's been a real challenge getting UVA to work on, enforcing these through the arm of UVA Dine. But this is also a real opportunity because when we have a single arbiter able to make that decision, able to enforce that switch and revoke these contracts when they're not upheld, it's a real potential for change. On the topic of waste here, we can see that actually on the left and right, UVA Dine and the products they purchase are almost completely compostable. These are photos taken by members of my team, and it shows that basically everything you can find in the actual UVA-sponsored dining locations is compostable. However, almost all utensils we could find, containers, receipts, things like that, constantly being generated every day are not compostable. And these things are all purchased through a UVA-approved portal. So this is another place, I think, where UVA Dine and the people who run that portal at UVA Dine have a real opportunity for improvement. Simply remove these from consideration. It is baffling to me that these goals are written into these contracts and then plastic forks are still allowed, or even worse, greenwashed products that claim to be 30% compostable, but the rest is plastic. So yeah, I think that's a really important step that can be taken to improve our waste goals. Circling back to our carbon emissions goals, though, as we can see here in this plot on the right, purchased electricity makes up about half of the carbon emissions coming from our electricity generation. Of course, UVA should strive to improve its internal electricity generation, but we need to recognize that those changes will take time and they will be expensive as they're operating on a much smaller scale. Now, it's not quite as easy as UVA switching over to another energy provider, one that has, a greener footprint, because unfortunately in our region, Dominion Power has a strong monopoly. 2/3 of Virginians in the whole state rely on Dominion, and in our region, there's no other choice. But this does not mean that the university cannot make the decision to work with Dominion. In fact, they already have. As we can see on the right here, UVA has invested in 2 very large solar facilities with Dominion that now provide 21% of the university's electricity. The CEO of Dominion, in fact, sits on UVA's board of visitors. Changes like this are very important to make, not just for our university, but for our entire region, making clean energy much more accessible and available. So what does the university look like with some of these suggestions implemented? Well, perhaps moving from smaller scale things to larger scale things, we see more plant-based days in our dining halls. We also see waste goals being redefined more clearly, making it more clear what waste actually means to an audience, and also enforced more clearly. Made for third parties that in a way that can actually be enforced and measured. Um, this future version of UVA sees its $14 billion endowment going towards not corporations that support fossil fuels and continue to generate our electricity using fossil fuels, but towards making cleaner grids. Again, not just for ourselves, but for our entire community, for our region, and for our state. And finally, I think that our sustainability goals need to be set higher. They need to be set more aggressively. We've already demonstrated that we're capable of reaching those goals. Um, we now have to prove that we can do it when the stakes are higher. And so, yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a good day.